moving on, we spoke a lot about data literacy, data-driven, etc. And I'm going to call Nadim Habib to the stage because Nadim has this very clear perspective on how far we all are, or companies are, organizations, from being data-driven as they're calling themselves to be or claiming themselves to be.
Okay, thank you very much. How much time do I have? I got 6 minutes, guys. All right, the guys are asleep. That tells you how interesting things are going here. Okay, thank you. So really quickly, I work with a lot of companies, and I love coming to these conferences and listening about how the world's going to be brutally sexy. But to be honest with you, I get these multiple feelings of discomfort. Big data sounds like a creepy date. Let me follow you around for a couple of months, I'll make your life better. That scares me. I look at companies going, oh, we're measuring NPS because, to a great extent what we're going to do is help understanding customers, etc. The companies that most use Net Promoter Score today are banks and telecommunications company. Please note that the second letter of NPS is promoter. Has anybody here ever recommended their bank or telecommunications firms to a friend over dinner? No. One person, two people. We just don't talk about them. We don't care about them, let's be honest. So we're using all these kind of data metrics that, to me, don't really make a lot of sense. WebEx, great solution. Why? I can mute it and actually do some work. What we're seeing around the world when I visit companies is that I come to conferences, I hear about all this glorious stuff was going to make companies better, and I go into companies, and I've never seen people this miserable. People are stressed to high hell. They're drowning in emails. They're running around meetings like they can't stop. They're working long hours. Anxiety levels are brutal. Almost 30% of the emails I get start with the sentence, sorry, I couldn't get back to you earlier. So much for AI. Yeah. You never have time to get anything done. We keep changing things, et cetera, et cetera. And so for me, the real sad indictment of where we are in terms of technology is that productivity in Europe and the US has been in decline since 1970. And it's not getting any better. We were producing 7% productivity increases a year on average in the 1980s. We're at 1.7% a year this year, which means every time we seem to introduce new technology, we seem to work worse, we seem to produce less, and we seem to do worse. And this is me being an optimist, or maybe a grumpy old man. So the big question here we have to ask ourselves is, what the hell's going on here? Why is this happening? I mean, I've got the sexiest toys in the world. I started working, as I explained to my students, before PCs, okay? I had to be trained in Lotus 1, 2, 3, and then I discovered the fax. That was a big deal in my life, okay? And then after that, we got the mobile phone. Now I've got Microsoft 365. I'm mobile everywhere. And are we doing so much better? Not really. Most people in this room will tell me that they're overworked, they're overstressed, they can't relax on holidays, they are sending emails at 5 a.m., they're back online at 11 p.m., it's a mess, and you know what? And they have more meetings than ever before. So, what is all this about? And to a great extent, I think I have always taken the organizational perspective, which let's start with a company, and then let's work that way. Okay? And one of the first things I ask my students is always, why do we need managers? It's a good question, I think, because I think most people have asked this question a lot. In the UK, a bunch of people put together a show called The Office, which clearly says we don't need managers. And The Economist very interestingly wrote that they suspect that 80% of managers in the UK are what they call accidental managers. You're an engineer, you wake up one day, you have a team, what do I do with them? Yeah? Well, what we do is you watch a TEDx, because these days you can lead in 30 seconds, or you buy a book in the airport. So because you inspire people and stuff like that. And now I've got my students coming to me saying my leader doesn't inspire me, and I'm like, dude, just work. You can figure that out later. So I'm exaggerating a little bit, but that's where we're going. So what is management all about? Why do we need managers? Well, let's go back to the theory. The theory is really simple. It's quite noble, actually. So you want a purpose? Here we go. It is to guarantee the survival of the firm. You like that one, don't you? But it is true, because to a great extent, the firm is subject to pressure from three big groups of stakeholders. So you've got your shareholders, the classics, putting a lot of pressure on management, saying what? Not only do we want a return, but we want it to be highly predictable. We want you to make a promise to us in January and deliver it in December. And I don't care how many slides you put up with exploding light bulbs saying the world is changing, you need to predict what you're delivering to me year after year after year. Continuous, consistent, and predictable returns. You have your employees are coming into you saying, can you tell me what my career will look like 7 years from now? And we can give them a big speech about turbulent, disruptive world, but they want to know. And so we have employees wanting resources, but also predictable and consistent growth paths they can work with. And customers. I love when we ask customers what they want. Anybody here do customer surveys? Stop. They always want more for less. It's not a big deal. It's kind of simple to figure that one out, right? You ask any customer, what do you want? More for less. Yeah, okay. They want more for less, and they want it predictable, and they want it consistent, and they want it always. And so managers and firms, to a great extent, are pressured in two dimensions, not only in a fight for resources, but also in predictability. And if you think about it, if you're giving everybody predictability, your basic need is to absorb turbulence and make sense of it. And the sense-making is huge. And you can see the potential for data and technology in that. If we can use that to make sense and generate predictability, we generate efficiencies. Based on that, we can help drive the company. And this has been management since the 1970s, and hasn't really changed. Now, as managers work, however, we found that managers typically fall into four categories. The least sophisticated to the most sophisticated. And this is not a personal insult to anybody. If you feel you're in one of these boxes, there's always room for improvement. So let's start with the first one. Okay? So if you think about this, productivity basically is production per hour, measured in euros, dollars, whatever, divided by the labor cost per hour. Okay? And the whole point is really simple. If we improve that, there's room next year for salary increases, the economy grows, everybody's better off, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's the driver of everything that's good in the world. And so how do we do this? Well, the simplest way to increase productivity is what we're seeing happening across the world. We squeeze salaries, and we ask people to work more hours without paying them. And this we're seeing across the board. If you look at the careers that work most, it used to be lawyers, now it's managers. Almost 40% of managers report working over 45 hours a week, when they all have contracts saying they need to work 40. Almost 70% of managers report working during their holidays. Of course. You swear to your husband you're not going to work on your holiday, and you're sneaking off the pool to the bathroom to check your email. And then you say, just once, because it was an emergency. And you're doing this again and again and again. And your HR departments are freaking out about this, so they've decided to hire out mindfulness courses. Because the point is, I can't help you with the work-life balance, but hey, we can deal with the symptoms. We can deal with that. That's a good one. So that's the first one. We see this a lot in organizations that are struggling to get traction. Basically, you're asking people to give more. They give more. You've promised them it's temporary until we sort stuff out. It doesn't work. It becomes a chronic illness. It's like diabetes, and it works. And most times, CFOs don't help. They introduce what I call the rule of N. They say, how many people do you want on your team? You say N. They say you can have N minus 1. And off we go on this pathway. And I think many people in the room have lived through that. Many are on N minus 3 at this stage, and still trying to figure out what went wrong. So that's level 1, and I say most of us could do this, but we don't enjoy it. Level 2 is to look at the hours and say, are the hours our people are spending being well spent? Is the hour of my employee something worthwhile? And you can imagine that back in the 70s, we didn't care. Your boss, it'd be 5 p.m., would suddenly scream, everybody in my office emergency meeting because all your hours are worthless, so I'll just interrupt you whenever I want. These days, we're being a bit more careful and saying to people, listen, every hour you work is shareholder money. And so I need to respect that. And we're starting to see that we're starting to measure things a little bit better. Processes like Kaizen are moving in that direction. Of course, it has the toxic side of it, which is that side that says, I'm going to control what you do. And we're having a hard time balancing the two things. But essentially, what we should be doing is saying to ourselves, let's measure. And let's help people measure how they spend their time, and let's help them eliminate processes that are useless. And this is where you see that first step where technology could be quite interesting. Simple stuff. Check-in at a hotel. Anybody here likes check-in in a hotel? Who would tell me that their favorite moment in a hotel is check-in? Okay, who says checkout is great? There we go. So why do hotels still allocate people to those two processes? It's completely ridiculous. I love queuing up. My favorite thing is getting up earlier so I can get behind 40 tourists so I can give you my money. That's really what I want to do. The funny thing is, if you all leave the hotel without paying, they will find you and send you the bill, and then you can pay. Try it. Okay, you can start introducing electronic payments remotely. It's all very good. So these are the small things which we notice, and you notice that in hotels that work that way and use technology to enable the hours and remove hours that are unnecessary, they typically have better customer service, they have higher profitability, and they have lower break-even. So classically, hotels will go 60-70% occupancy for break-even. Those hotels are 30-40%. And this is significant because it guarantees, remember, the survival of the firm. The third way we can do this is to upsell, sell more to the customer, raise price, etc. That, as you can imagine, requires a manager that's slightly more sophisticated than the one focusing on the hours, because now we're starting to look at our customers. And again, we can see where data is useful for that. Not so much into creepy guess, you know, if you bought chocolate, you must be pregnant or in love, but much more about, you know, no, I will not try to sell you birth insurance or insurance for health insurance that includes birth because you're a 64-year-old woman. The data will just tell me a little bit more than it should. And that's quite useful because what we can do is we can upsell, improve the process as we go through this. And typically, as you can see, moving from 1 to 3 requires management that's more sophisticated. And that's, for me, one of the biggest challenges for any technology introduction in the firm is if my management's not at 3, you're not selling, you're not introducing technology, because at 1, all they want is a machine that can do something cheaper and reduce costs. Yeah? They might buy a time control system and cameras to make sure you don't go to the toilet in the middle of the day. And then we have the fourth way to do it. And the fourth way really is to challenge the whole equation and to say, is there a different way we can produce the same results? This typically comes from startups. What they're saying is, this doesn't make sense. We see this, for example, in real estate. The classic model has been person connects buyer and seller. They're fiduciaries in the middle. They make sure the deal happens. We're seeing a lot of firms coming in saying, we don't need a human being here. Technology can connect them. Let's completely change it. They can drop prices 80% and make money. And so these are the 4 ways to improve productivity. And for me, it's always been the same. Every time people say to me, it's digital transformation, I say, no, it's not. It's cultural transformation. Then you can buy the toys. Because what we see consistently in most organizations is we just don't have the management sophistication we want to match the promise of the technology. And so what we do is, you know, we get people in saying, we have this great CRM system. Has anybody here who works in a company been excited about introduction of new software, except for the buyer and the seller? Exactly. You know, when people say to me, Nadim, we're getting SAP, what I see is fireworks across the room. People say, yes, it's going to be such a great adventure, SAP. You know, we're really going to enjoy ourselves. So clearly, we still have a lot of journeys to go on that. Now, it gets more complicated. OK, we're down to 8 minutes. It's getting more complicated because as we're making this journey, our markets are shifting. And that's why we're in this field where people call it disruption. I don't really believe in disruption. It's easier to tell your boss it was disruption than to say I screwed up. You know, I didn't see it coming. It was obvious, but I didn't see it. Oh, God, we were disrupted. Yeah. And that's why we say failure is great and things like that. But take it back a little bit. Your markets are maturing in what sense? Typically, when we have a new market, think about when McDonald's opened in your country, when IKEA opens in your country, new markets are opened. Market tends to grow super, super fast, and the firm providing the service tends to have all the power. Customers have very little power. They beg to be sold things. They say, please, please, please. They know very little about the product. And so the seller is very product-driven. They know what they're talking about. They shove it through. What we forget is as competition tightens, new firms come in. And how does a new firm compete? This is not economic theory, but a new firm basically goes up to your customer and says, they're ripping you off. I can give you this cheaper, et cetera. And as they do this, your market starts to mature with new entrants. What we don't talk about is your customer is getting better and better trained as the cycle rolls over. And when the market reaches full maturity, your customer knows more about your product than you do. And now we have a problem. If my dad had received a call from his bank, he would have taken it very seriously. My students get calls from their bank, and they go, oh, here they are again trying to sell me shit. Don't call me ever again. I don't think our grandparents would have talked to their bank that way. This is the shift in consumer power. You look at telecommunications. None of us care anything about our telecom firms. We're like, just sell me a pipe, make it good, and pick up the phone when I call you, but don't ever call me. That's how we're treating them. And this is really because the market's fully matured. Now, what happens is we are living in a world where managers are trying to shift up to this new world where they can do better, while our markets are maturing much quicker because information is flowing faster, and so customers are gaining power. Now, what does this do? It means we have a lot more failure. Have you noticed that we live in the era of entrepreneurship? It is the coolest thing in the world. I teach entrepreneurship here at master's level to students with no work experience, and I tell them all, don't do it. You know, I'm sorry, but statistically, you're dumb if you do this because most of you are going to get jobs earning over 60,000 euros in the first year and then pushing onwards. Entrepreneurship, you probably will fail and you'll be miserable. So don't do it. It doesn't make sense on paper. But I do tell them that entrepreneurship is good for an economy because it's a Darwinistic response to failure. So it's kind of like a bacteria that cleans up systems. So typically, if you think about it, entrepreneurship is when firms start to fail, other firms see opportunities saying they're failing, I can come in and replace them. You know, the most basic failure is the failure of the job market, which is why immigrants tend to be more entrepreneurial. They see failure in the job market. Only thing they can do is create their own jobs. Later on, we see startups typically start by saying, I see a gap here because these firms are failing. And we're failing more not because we're dumb. We're failing more because we're doing this transition in maturing markets, and we're having enormous difficulty matching technology to our maturity and our culture. And this is really where the big challenge is. And we don't talk enough about this. We talk a lot about the toys. We don't talk a lot about how to get it to fit together. And technology has accelerated. And so now what do we have, and why is this so tough for most managers? Because now we have, for the first time, enormous customer power. I think we all agree this. Customers have more power than ever before, and nobody likes customers with power. I don't think anybody likes that. We kind of like our customers to be relatively ignorant, yeah? They come to our store, they say, I want a blue car. We say, no, you don't, you want green. Oh, okay, thank you. You know, that's the customers we like. And then they say, can I have a green car? We say, no, come back in 2 weeks. And there they are 2 weeks later. And we say, oh, it didn't arrive yet, come back tomorrow. And they say, thank you. Those are the guys we like. We don't like customers who know too much, because they make our life miserable. But to a great extent, much of the agile movement we're seeing has started because customers have this power. And please note, the first people to talk agile were IT people. Why? Because they're the ones dealing with extremely powerful customers within their organizations who are buying technology themselves without asking the IT department for help. You know, HR says, I now have a platform, can you please integrate it? Finance says, Power BI, I need some new dashboards, please do that, please. Sales says, I need a new app. And the poor IT departments are drowning, and if you ask them, how long will it take you to finish all your project? They say 47 years. So you have to prioritize. I know. How do you prioritize? Whoever screams loudest. And this has been really the way we've seen this happening and driving forward, which is why they're the first to say, no, I need to be agile. And what is agile? Agile is simply making decisions much closer to the customer. Much, much closer. And so agile to me has always been about customer centricity. If you want to be agile, you're making decisions close to the customer because that's where the critical moment happens, which is very different from most of our firms where decisions are made back at headquarters at the top of the structure and therefore far away. So the first thing we're seeing is customer centricity drives agile. And the second thing we're seeing is technology is driving scale. And now we're companies dealing with the probably biggest paradox we've ever seen. We have to be big and we have to be fast. And for anybody my age, they didn't live in the same house. Yeah, we were told you can either be fast or you can be big, which is why many big companies would create little spin-off startups to get speed in them because they were too afraid they'd be eaten in the big monster. We have to be big and we have to be fast, and this is the contradiction that makes suddenly technology so much more interesting. And this, to me, is the big pathway of data. And this is the big pathway of digital transformation. It is that for the first time, it is actually possible to ensure that we have the decision speed of a startup and the scale of a mega company so that we can get the economies of scale on the cost side and the nimbleness and the customer focus on the other side. And this is how, in my perspective, we should be looking at technology. Not so much as a stand-up toy that comes off the blue and suddenly, oh, let's introduce it and see what happens. One of my favorite jokes is that everybody I know who has CRM forgets to do the R. Just think about it for a minute, yeah? Because they don't know how to do the R, because they haven't thought the whole process through, so they're just a customer management database, that's about it. And then I get an email from my bank at Christmas, and I get another one on my birthday. And they think they're being smart. Because what they think is that when I get an SMS from my bank on my birthday saying happy birthday, I go to my wife and say, oh, my bank is so special. But they're still lost. My bank calls me up and says to me, how do you classify our products from 1 to 10? And I don't know how to answer. It's a current account. I put money in, it shows up, I take it out, it disappears. I can't really classify it, but sure, I'll give it an 8. She goes, you're not happy? Fine, 9. And most of us are doing this, and some poor guy's putting an Excel spreadsheet together, and he goes to the board and he says, Net Promoter Score has risen from 7.64 to 7.88. Ooh, we're all happy about that. Yeah. But their last question is even more funny. Do you have any recommendations for the bank? And I used to say no, and now I say, yes, actually. Last night I put the family together. We had a brainstorm session with some Post-its. I put together a PowerPoint. Can I send it to you? And then I have to say no, because I don't think about you. I don't wake up in the morning thinking, oh, I've got to help my bank. Oh, how can I help them? The poor guys. That's your job. And this is the whole point. In times of customer power, design from the customer backwards. Don't design and then layer technology on top of it in the hope that at the end the customer will say thank you, because it's not going to work. And in a time of scale, design for ensuring you're building an organization that can make the right decision in the right place at the right time. And use technology for that as well. And you do those two things, and suddenly one day you're waking up and you're using technology to drive productivity and customer happiness, and that typically guarantees the survival of the firm. Guys, thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.